how do we think about suicide? Particularly, like if you know anything about the Roman Catholic Church, they actually teach that if you commit suicide, you're condemned to hell. So it's a really big question that some people will have, and some people haven't taught very clearly about it from the Bible. So, like, the first thing to note is that suicide doesn't stop people from getting to heaven if you're a Christian. Yeah. In Romans 7, it showed Paul reflects on himself as a Christian who struggles with sin, and even in that state talks about how he's still forgiven. And so it's important to remember, like, people like Paul and even David, even though he actually killed Uriah, he was saved even though he still murdered. And so the point is, Jesus' sacrifice has forgiven for Christians our past, present, and future sin. And so if Jesus' blood is capable of forgiving any sin, why wouldn't it cover this sin, potential sin as well? The second thing is to note that suicide isn't a wise course of action, because in so doing, we take the place of God. So there are 5 instances of suicide in the Bible: in Judges 9, 1 Samuel 31, 2 Samuel 17, and 1 Kings 16, and Matthew 27. And all of these happen in the context of shame and defeat. Someone's shameful or being defeated, so they commit suicide. The more noble characters ask God to take their lives. So Jonah and Job both, instead of trying to take their own life, they ask God to take their life. So God clearly views our desire to want to take our own life as not a good thing, because life is given by God. We should respect, honor, and value life. Job says, God gives and takes away. So if we take our own life, then in a way we're taking God's place. The third thing to note is that God has a purpose for our life, which we often can't see. So we need to trust God with our lives. We should pray for wisdom, and we can even pray that God would take our lives sooner. There was a lady in my in a retirement village that I used to visit, and she said that she wished the Lord would take her away, and often pray that God would take her. But knowing she was still here, she knew there must be some purpose for it. So we should pray for wisdom and pray for an end to of our lives. But ultimately, we need to ask it's God's will to be done, not ours. And we know in terms of, like, God uses bad situations often for people's good. So the story with Joseph, he was betrayed by his brothers, but ended up becoming a ruler in Egypt. And in Genesis 50:20, he says, what you intended for evil, God intended for good, the saving of many lives. And so God planned a horrible situation for good, even through evil. Similarly, in Acts 2, Jesus' death was planned for good. So he works even the worst of personal circumstances and suffering for his glory and our good. The fourth thing I want to say is we must care for those struggling with mental health conditions to help lift their eyes to Jesus. 90% of people who die by suicide have an underlying mental health condition, especially depression, bipolar disorder, and substance abuse. So what we as Christians need to do is to stay connected with people struggling with mental health, recognize that that worsening mental health could lead to this. We should keep having a conversation to see what's going on for them, what they're thinking, and ask for help from our youth leaders or from mental health professionals. I struggled with mental health at depression, and I actually at one point thought about suicide, and I actually shared it with somebody. And so often people in those situations might share it, and that's an opportunity to care for them and to take them, bring in some professional help. The great verse to close this out is, I think, in Romans 8, Paul says, what can separate us from the love of Christ? Famine, hunger, naked, sword, knowing all these things, we're more than conquerors. And so there's great confidence in the gospel, and for those who we might have lost through suicide, that if they believe in Jesus, not even suicide can separate us from the love of Jesus.